Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com, and you'll find my 6 podcasts: the Podfather, helping people become podcasters; the Awakening, exposing fraud and corruption but with solutions; the Crypto, all things blockchain technology; meditation podcast; speaking podcast; and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Welcome to the Crypto podcast and also the Awakening podcast. And when I read out the intro, you'll understand why I'm actually doing both of these. And I just want to mention, because a lot of people have wrote to me, I haven't put out episodes on a lot of my podcasts for over 2 weeks. And the reason being, I was on holidays and my car was broken into on the second day and my laptop was taken. So I had a load of podcasts ready to go just to edit them. So that's why they didn't go out. So apologies, but we're back to normal. And now let's get back to my great guest that's from California in the US of A. He's a pharmacist and the visionary founder of NiHowdy. I hope I'm doing it justice with the pronunciation. A startup on a mission to make prescription drugs affordable for everyone. With years of first-hand experience in the pharmacy industry, James witnessed the broken nature of the drug rebate system, where rebates often went to the middlemen instead of the people who need them most. This frustration led him to create NiHowdy, a platform that passes drug rebates back to consumers, turning them into assets like Bitcoin. And for those watching on Spotify, BitChute and YouTube and Rumble, you see he's got a beautiful Bitcoin t-shirt on him, and stock rewards to help cover future healthcare costs. James believes that by leveraging technology and financial innovation, NiHowdy can disrupt the prescription savings landscape and give back power to patients, which, to be honest with you, is something I love to hear. Please welcome James Wong.
Thanks for having me, Roy.
Yeah, no problem. So, we're going to touch on everything, but I suppose, you're very young anyway. So, for pharmacists and everything, so I suppose let's kind of tell your kind of farmer career first, that so people can understand how you got into it, and then kind of what created this.
Yeah, I practically grew up in a whole family full of pharmacists, so it was pretty natural for me to want to become a pharmacist while I was growing up. Pretty much graduated from pharmacy school here. It requires a doctorate's degree here in America. So that was a lot of fun doing that program. And then after school, I decided to work for myself. So I decided to open my own practice here in the Bay Area. Did amazingly well for myself. I helped a lot of my psychiatric patients and long-term care facilities out there. So that was a very cool niche that we built out. We built that business up, and during COVID, I just became very disgusted at how sort of healthcare was operated, actually. What I noticed was that a lot of these drug manufacturers start to incentivize pharmacies as well as other middlemen in this industry to push their products. And one of the ways they do that is by giving rebates as incentives. For me, I was getting checks almost every month, every quarter, every year from anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars just for selling products. And I just said, this is kind of disgusting. Like, this money should actually go back to the people who pay for these medications, not to the operators of this business or to the middlemen who are pushing these products. But I started realizing, it's very hard to sort of pass these rebates back to individuals, probably because it's just the distribution of it. It's very difficult to do when there's so many people out there in America buying medications, buying prescriptions that they really need. But, I started to think about this idea after I sold my business. I was like, we should really pass back drug rebates to the people. And, I was talking to some of my colleagues and I said, why don't we pass it back in Bitcoin? And I have to say, a lot of my colleagues in pharmacy thought I was crazy. A lot of people in healthcare, they, obviously they work a fiat job. They're being paid for by the government. It's a heavily subsidized industry by the government. So when you talk about Bitcoin to people in healthcare, a lot of them are very skeptical by the whole thing. So I started working on this idea, I want to say right around the time FTX collapsed. And I was like, I think this is going to be a great idea where we're passing back Bitcoin or, these drug rebates back to individuals. So it took us about, 3-4 years to put this whole startup together, or this idea of like, can we make prescription drugs a little bit more affordable? Can we do it in a way where it's different from what everyone else is doing in the industry? So we have about 50 to 70,000 pharmacies actually in our network right now that we work with. So you can actually go to a major publicly traded company like CVS, Walgreens, or Rite Aid to pick up your prescriptions. And if you use our platform, you can actually get drug rebates in Bitcoin now and soon stock rewards. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself, how I created the program. But yeah.
Cool. I was writing a book a couple of years ago, and I was talking to a friend in Ireland, and I was asking them about the kickbacks, because Ireland has all the top pharmas because of the tax loopholes that go on there. And I was asking her which companies don't do kickbacks, and she said they all do. So, and it's like, as you say, it's the end user should be getting the benefit. And the worst thing is, sometimes people are motivated by the financial rewards. And I've heard of situations that you could have two products. Let's say it's $10 and $100. The $10 one is better, but because of the financial kickbacks, you're getting pushed something else. So it's like there's a few kind of sides to this that are actually detrimental to the actual person. So well, I'm curious, how does it work with like insurance? Because sometimes people are covered with insurance. Is it that the insurance gets a rebate on this, that it gets a less price? Because, for example, I saw when in hospitals, the drip bag, at one stage they were charging like $800, and somewhere else, in some other country, it can be $1. So I'm just with like medications. How does it work with insurance?
Oh man, I got a million things to say about those comments. Well, first of all, sometimes manufacturers, they won't just have one drug on their portfolio. They'll actually have like a dozen or so. And maybe they'll strategically price one drug a little bit higher. For example, let's price it at $100, even though there's a competitor that's maybe at $5 or $6 per unit. What they'll end up doing is saying, well, you have to buy the $100 product, because if you don't buy this $100 product, this other product we have here, we're not going to give you any rebates, and we're the only, say, drug that's out there on the market. We're going to jack up this price even higher. They play these games to essentially, extract as much value or money from the system as much as possible. But what makes it really problematic is that, the government, we're pretty much, at least in America, our healthcare is like heavily subsidized here, especially for people who are over the age of 65 and over. If you actually look at the data in terms of how much these programs spend on drugs, you'll start to realize that a lot of the drug spend they pass out, 50% of that drug spend actually returns back to the government, as opposed to people who pay out of pocket. None of that money ever comes back in the form of rebates. So that's kind of troubling for at least two reasons. One, we're overpaying, but two, you start to think about how much money we spend into the system. We're just printing dollars at this point. There isn't a mechanism that subsidizes healthcare. I mean, we're not collecting enough tax revenue. We're essentially printing more money to have these drugs being paid for, new drugs come onto the market. It's not a great system to have. And it's getting to a point where, the amount we're spending as a country versus how much money is being collected as revenue from taxes, it's not sustainable. You mentioned something about the IV drip bags earlier. Actually, I have a very funny story to tell you. When I was working in the hospital, I remember this medical student actually decided to order IV Tylenol for everyone on the floor. And she wanted to use it for pain management post-op. Very good choice, by the way. But America, IV Tylenol bags cost about $1,000, at least for that time I was practicing, about anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 per bag, as opposed to when she was practicing in the UK, it's like pennies on the dollar. But here in America, the actual preferred alternative for post-op pain is morphine. Morphine is much cheaper than IV Tylenol. So you kind of saw this issue where it created a lot of people to be dependent on morphine or opiates right after surgery. Again, a lot of, incongruency and sort of misalignment with the way we sort of practice healthcare here in America. But I had to just say that as when you were talking about IV drip bags, it's a little bit crazy here, the way healthcare is practiced in America. We just have so many middlemen and just a lot of different misalignments, incentives here.
Yeah. Like to be honest, I've read loads of books. I've looked at a load of stuff with the FDA, and a lot of people think, oh, this is FDA approved and everything. And you couldn't have a more corrupt organization if you tried. And I mean, you see people working for FDA going to Big Pharma or vice versa, and it's sponsored by FDA. I know that half or what, like I get different figures for that. But the fact that there's even 1% would be going from Big Pharma to the FDA is kind of strange. So, like, and they knock all natural remedies and everything. It's like they really try to shut down anyone that's trying to really help people. So, is there any where's the light at the end of the tunnel? I'm seeing, like, even recently there was a show Rogan, there was some guy on, and they're kind of talking about this, and they're going to the Senate and they're having discussions, but at the same time, it's like the guy on the street knows the whole system is corrupt, but it's still happening and it's sick. But yet there's a load of people's their pockets being lined. But I suppose what you're doing is definitely helping.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing here at NiHowdy is essentially working with these manufacturers and saying, look, the people who deserve these rebates aren't the middlemen. It's not the insurance companies. It's the people who actually pay for these medications out of pocket, who don't have insurance or have terrible insurance. Those rebates should end up going back to the people. And I think anyone would agree. Like, if you spend money on something, well, you should be incentivized to get at least some money back when you spend on that product or so. Only in healthcare do you kind of see this where there's rebates being aggregated by the middleman and it's never being passed back to the end consumer, which is, for me, very strange. You talked a little about the FDA, and I always like talking about this new drug, Ozempic. I'm sure you've heard about it at this point. It's a weight loss drug that, everyone seems to be on, at least here in America. But what's really fascinating about this company is they have this indication by the FDA where it's used for weight loss or diabetes. But because this drug has been so successful in helping people lose weight, it's actually going back to the FDA to seek more indications so potentially it could be used for other things. What I'm trying to basically get at is they're trying to say that Ozempic is, it has multiple purposes other than just weight loss. Some of the most outrageous indications I've seen that they're proposing is like multiple sclerosis, hyperlipidemia. Well, it kind of makes sense, but there's just some really crazy off the wall indications I've seen with Ozempic, and it just seems like this new wonder drug that came out. Don't know if I necessarily agree with all these potential indications that they're having, but yeah, even then, it's like a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are able to put very cheap products onto the market and extract thousands of dollars when it only costs $5 or $6 to make. Very strange, but again, that's American healthcare.
And like with the quantities then, because obviously incentives increase when you reach a certain quota. And like, are you dealing with the ethics of the person that's prescribing it? Because he's kind of going, hey, if I get this quota, and I mean, even in your situation, because you go, hey, if I get this extra amount, everybody gets X. So it's a strange system like that, why they can't just sell it for the actual price and that people aren't paying it out of pocket rather than getting the rebate. But it's fantastic that they are actually able to do what you're doing and you're giving it in different options.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the weird things is like if you actually look at any other industry that's very product driven, let's just say like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, like two really good beverages, right? I mean, this industry as well, like the soda industry, they also have rebates that they incentivize the operators, like grocery stores, liquor stores, I mean, gas stations, to push their products as well. They'll pay them what's essentially a placement fee to put products on, the middle shelf rather than on the bottom, so consumers can see it more. They might say, look, if you sell 1,000 units, I'll give you 1% back. If you sell 10,000 units, I'll give you 5% back. And they'll sort of play this mathematical game that's out there. So a lot of operators will figure out ways of, how do I sell more units of this product? Again, pharmacy is really no different. There will be rebates that are volume driven. Sometimes, depending on the insurance company or what we call as a pharmacy benefit manager in the industry, they'll do what's called a placement fee. They'll say, look, there's a formulary or list of drugs that you cover. If you put us on the first tier option, meaning, you're pushing this product out to all of your members, we'll give you an incentive of like, say, 100,000 annually just for having our product on tier 1, as to maybe opposed to our competitor who's going to be on tier 2 or tier 3. Now, when someone's on tier 2, tier 3, consumers are probably going to end up paying more out of pocket to pay for those medications. So there's less of an incentive, or there's more of what I'd say, a blocker for the customer to want to use that drug. Again, it's very strange because the way every insurance company does their formulary is dependent on a regional basis. So how someone practices or insurance company might practice, say in Northern California, might be very different from someone out in Louisiana. So it's, again, very strange that we had this. It's just, everyone has the same option of drugs here in America, but the way we go about covering these drugs, the way we go about affordability, it's all over the place here, unfortunately.
Like you mentioned Pepsi and Coke, and I suppose not everybody realizes they're kind of owned by the same people, BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, all these different, but they're also these companies that own a lot of the toxic food companies, which create a lot of the diseases, and then they also own the big pharmas. So like they're kind of, hey, we'll make you sick, but we'll also try to cure you or make you a patient for life. And I mean, just with your own kind of background and what you're trying to do, mate, it makes me sick seeing that. That it's like, they're supposed to be the competition authority and to stop monopolies and everything. But that's what I can see in any industry. That's to stop the good boys from becoming big, to compete against the bad boys, because they allow them to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a very interesting point. I mean, a lot of these medications out there, they're not really, I would say, cures, right? It's just it's more of a maintenance medication. It's there to just kind of get you a little bit better, but it's not really a cure for the most part. There's actually this one medication that came out. It's called Herwani. It was used to treat or cure, I'd say, essentially hepatitis C. Hepatitis affects a lot of people worldwide. But when this product first came out on the market, manufacturer wanted people to pay roughly about $100,000 a month for what's essentially a 3-month therapy dose. You take it for 3 months and you're cured of hepatitis C. That was the whole idea behind it. But you start to look at it and say, well, my gosh, I mean, a lot of people can't afford $300,000 just to be cured of hepatitis. But you start to look at what's called the pharmacoeconomics, how drug manufacturers will put drugs onto the market. They'll say, well, we can justify it's at $100,000 per dose because the other treatment options are not essentially cures. They are medications that would essentially prolong someone's life, but there's a lot of nasty side effects that go with that. They'll measure what kind of medications they'll be taking. They're going to have side effects, what medications they'll be taking for the side effects. Maybe they will be more likely to stay in the hospital and need to pay for room and board or hotel or lodging around that hospital stay. So we'll start to factor in all these different direct and indirect costs and start to say, well, we can justify this at $100,000 per dose. But what's really crazy is, the United States government, at least, we pay for a lot of that research, R&D to happen. So when the government pays for a lot of this R&D and suddenly a lot of these patents become privatized, again, there's a huge misaligned incentive. The idea is that you want these medications to be as affordable as possible for a lot of people, but unfortunately they're not. Part of that reason is also we subsidize healthcare as an American taxpayer. A lot of these manufacturers are always incentivized to push their product at a higher price year over year because they know at the end of the day, who's going to pay for this? It's the government. Medicare is going to pay for this. Medicaid's going to pay for this. Hell, your large employer, whoever it is, they're going to pay for this at the end of the day. Again, not a very great way of doing business. I want to say probably before Obamacare or what's known as the Affordable Care Act, people generally just had what's called $1 million cap threshold on their insurance plan. So a lot of drug manufacturers back then, they would try to strategically price their drugs in a way where it would not take up the whole entire cap. So an example would be, if there's a new drug that came onto market, they can't price it at $1 million per dose. I mean, that sounds great for the company, but they can't do that because essentially there's only $1 million lifetime cap of that individual that they're allotted for. So they would have to say, well, this doesn't make sense. They're probably going to be on other medications. We could probably price it something more affordably or more reasonably at maybe say $20 a dose per year or something like that. But yeah, it's ever since you've seen the rise of Obamacare, new drugs that come into the market, and this is actually the FDA's data here, drugs are actually 20% year over year more expensive now. And I think the baseline price per doses, last time I looked, is about $200,000. Drugs are getting to the point where it's not even affordable for the regular person.
And There was some CEO, I forget his name, but he basically, I think he was buying patents of different, and increasing, I think insulin was one of them, but he was like increasing it by 100 times or 1,000 times. And he got away with it for a while, but eventually I think they've kind of nipped it in the bud. But, like when you've got people pricing stuff that's beyond the means of, like I'll give you an example. I know there was a girl that used to work for me, and she used to go, like while she was doing university, and she'd go to the States. I think it was Michigan or something like that as a waitress, because she'd make so much money that kind of got her through the whole year, and it was worthwhile for her. But she was telling me that there was people, some guy nearly chopped his finger off her, and he wouldn't go to the hospital because they weren't covered. And like there was people with kind of serious injuries that you think nothing about in Europe, just go in, get stitched up or whatever. But they're actually, because they could be really threatening their own life, or they could be threatening a limb based on that. And it's a sad state of affairs that the industry is so corrupt that it's not actually doing what it's meant to do, which is to actually provide healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that CEO that did, buy patents and raise the price of those patents like exorbitantly overnight, right? I think you might be referring to Martin Shkreli. The thing is, I want to say he legally didn't do anything wrong. He just found a drug that not that many people were on, that was heavily subsidized by the government. He raised the price as high as possible. And he pretty much said, look, I know the government's going to have to pay for this because it's an orphan drug. Not that many people are on it. And, they're going to have to pay for it no matter what. But he's been doing something that the entire pharmaceutical industry has been doing for decades. He kind of became the poster child of Pharma Bro, unfortunately. But I mean, it's more of like, this industry has been doing this for so long. For as long as I've been practicing, and even before my parents have been practicing. So it's, you always see these hedge funds, these private equity firms that will buy these patents and just raise these prices exorbitantly overnight. So again, I mean, it's not great, but this happens time over time again. I get very upset, obviously, thinking about it. Yeah.
And I believe it was Reagan that brought in the bill that basically gave Pharma that there's no liability. Can you ever see that changing? Because to me, that is so strange. That's like, yeah, do what you want. And it's like, yeah, we're like, basically humans have become the guinea pigs.
Yeah, I do think about how do you fix, healthcare as a whole? Right? How do we have this essentially be, right now, what I look at healthcare, it's like an endless money pit. We're not incentivized in preventing, diseases from happening, or we're not pushing preventive care as well as we should be. And this is going to be very controversial for a lot of listeners of what my recommendation is to fix healthcare. But to fix it, we have to stop subsidizing. We should not have the state or the federal government paying for healthcare services. I understand that would create a lot of pandemonium and chaos. But I do think that if you had a system where, we did not have, as American taxpayers or just as taxpayer in general, subsidized healthcare, the entire market would have to correct overnight, because a lot of these hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, they would not be able to price the drug at, $100,000 per dose, because they realize there's no one that can afford or pay for that. Essentially, it'd be much more realistic pricing in line with what people actually have the purchasing power or capability to do. Again, very controversial, because I know a lot of people want healthcare to be, paid for by the government. Some people believe it's a right, but it's to the point where we're putting so much money, we're running a deficit. It just doesn't make any sense. If you look at America as a business or a company, I mean, we're spending more than we make. It becomes a point where, it's a questionable thing. So again, I kind of fell in love with Bitcoin because I was like, there's a finite amount, it's deflationary, has great, amazing property rights, it's a bearer asset. But this idea that, you can give Bitcoin to people and maybe say over, 5, 10 years, or maybe in sometime in the future, that the value of that Bitcoin would be worth much more in fiat standards or fiat terms. And the fact that Bitcoin is infinitely divisible, I thought it's a very provocative and different way of at least approaching healthcare costs. So again, yeah. A little bit.
Look, let's get into, I mean, like, one, you might tell me your own kind of crypto journey, but two, because like especially the elder, like, you know, people in 65, you know, in retirement age, you know, being tech savvy isn't, you know, they weren't born into that, and it's very difficult to kind of explain exchanges and a wallet and stuff like that. And it's not like a bank, you send it to the wrong account, it comes back to you. It doesn't. So how does your system work, and are you catering for people that aren't tech savvy?
Yeah, so that's actually quite interesting. So the first part is we aggregate and collect rebates from the manufacturers and the pharmacies. We usually receive them anywhere from 30 days out to anywhere from 6 months out. From there, we aggregate it based on the members' accounts. We pay out all our Bitcoin actually on the Lightning Network. So one of the common complaints you always hear about Bitcoin is, you know, the transaction fees can be really expensive at times. What we do is we put everything on the Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 native to Bitcoin. The transaction fees are like 1,000%. So it's like very cheap. It's probably more affordable than, I'd say it's cheaper than, you know, your credit card processing fees, which are like, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5%. But yeah, we do handle all our payments out on Lightning. So if someone doesn't want to withdraw, that's totally fine. They can leave it in their account over at NiHowdy, or if they want to take custody of their own asset, then they can withdraw on Lightning Network with a Lightning wallet. We will be building out a capability where, you know, we're teaching and educating some of our users, you know, what's the difference of self-custody versus, you know, having someone else custody your own assets. Obviously, I would prefer people to self-custody, take the assets for themselves. Bitcoin is the better asset after all.
Like, how are you then protecting that? Because I mean, there's so much scammers out there. I mean, I've had a lot of my guests, and you know, like people that it's their business, and they've all been hacked, or they go to a domain and it's a slight little typo change in it, and you know, you don't spot it. Like, so how are you when those that don't transfer to a gold wallet? How are you protecting the when it's on your system, basically your platform?
Yeah, great question. I think first of all, a lot of it's going to be coming down to education. You're going to have to teach people that, you know, Bitcoin is very different from how you would treat your own bank account. It's essentially a very long string of words, or a very long password, and you need to keep it safe. More safe than, I would say, your social security number. I think you have to educate people on the power of what Bitcoin is, what it is, first of all. And then you have to let people understand, well, they have an option of being lazy and letting it sit in, say, your Coinbase account or some sort of exchange, or you can try to take custody of it yourself and learn what a wallet is. You can understand what cold storage is. Frankly, I think education is the only way you can really combat that issue, where people don't understand, you know, how to handle that technological barrier. There are a lot of tools, I would say, that makes it a little bit easier for people to get into Bitcoin, you know, regardless of age or not. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great resources that are out there to sort of teach people how to take custody of the Bitcoin, how to transact with it, what to do with it.
Because I remember, even, I don't know, I think you have Revolut in the US. But basically, they were allowing you to buy and sell crypto. I mean, it was not their system, but because it was such a big organization, it was just making it easy. That it was just, you go in, you pick whether you wanted to buy Bitcoin or whatever, and to simplify it, rather than putting in the different codes and just, and also like even just cashing it in. Because sometimes some of the exchanges, you know, like recently one, no, because I was just playing around with a few different coins, and it's like it froze the account, like, and I'm trying to add money to the account, and it's freezing the account, and I like, there's so many people have these problems that they haven't simplified it yet. It's, you know, this, and you know, like with Binance, like, I mean, I was looking at their report, and it wasn't signed by an individual. It was signed by the company, which doesn't make it valid. There was so many different things like that I'm looking that it doesn't give me trust. But like, is there other, like, what exchange regarding people kind of maybe buying, or if they're changing? I presume, can they actually, on your system, can they convert it to cash and put it onto their card, or must they go on to another exchange?
Yeah, so part of that, when I was thinking about the idea of how do you pass drug rebates back to people, say you buy a $10 drug at the pharmacy, your rebate's like 3%, 4%, like 30, 40 cents. How do you give that back to someone in today's financial system? Do I mail you a check? Because postage and handling is where you double, so that's not possible. Do I do an ACH payment? Well, for electronic payments for business, I mean, they charge anywhere from a quarter to 50 cents to start, plus a sliding scale or percentage of the fee of whatever that number is. So again, electronic payments aren't that great. I saw Bitcoin as a really great way of doing that. I understand that Bitcoin, it's not for everyone, and they might not like it as much. But we are offering stock rewards as the next form of, I would say, rewards for our customers. That are fractionalized shares. So if you want a fractionalized share of GoPro or Tesla or Lululemon, whatever company like, that's something we also will be offering very soon in our next iteration. But yeah, I mean, and in terms of, how do you understand, learn Bitcoin? How do you sort of take custody of things? And education is going to be the most important thing there for a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, members who sign up on the platform have an option of either choosing Bitcoin or some sort of stock reward early soon, but no cash back.
And with the wallets, then, is there any wallet that you recommend? Because everybody has their own favorite. I mean, I use Ledger and I've heard of trends, and there's a lot of different ones. So I'm just curious, is there any wallet that you would actually recommend?
Yeah, again, really great question here. For me, I prefer, if you're going to if you're going to choose Bitcoin, you should just buy a Bitcoin only wallet. Jade is a great one. Sparrow Wallet, which is, open source software that can be done on your computer. That one's great as well. I would typically try to tell people to avoid Trezor or Ledger. Typically when you have all these different, I would say, cryptocurrencies like Ethereum or Solana mixed together with Bitcoin, there's a lot more, I would say, vulnerability in that, because again, Bitcoin is just kind of like very simple, just one code, as opposed to, you have all these different cryptocurrencies mixed in with Bitcoin. There's more attack vectors in that sense when working with these other wallets. I typically don't like to encourage people to go down that route. One other thing is, some early customer service I've seen from like Trezor and Ledger. I mean, can't remember which one it is, but I was reading on the Reddit post one time that, people were trying to move like 20 Bitcoin at a time. And essentially the software generated the wrong address and sent those 20 Bitcoin to an address that was not accessible by the wallet. So I've seen that issue maybe like 2 or 3 times on the forum. So again, that gives me a little bit of heartburn. I wouldn't want to trust a wallet like that.
But to be honest, that's a fantastic advice, because even with the NFTs and everything, I mean, I bought a lot of domains when you could buy the domains because they're for a lifetime. I mean, the first time I got caught, I thought I was buying something for a lifetime and it wasn't. But then I started getting free stuff and I was like, what's this? And apparently if I had clicked on it, it gets access to my wallet. And I didn't know that, and so people like, well, someone gave me something free. So when you've got so many different things, so that makes sense what you've just said about keep Bitcoin to Bitcoin, because you're kind of, don't put all your eggs into one basket, and it's a good way of protecting what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of attack vectors when it comes to, smart contracts. That's essentially the whole narrative. These new cryptocurrencies are out, like Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche. I don't know all the names, but for Bitcoin, there isn't a smart contract. So there's a less attack vectors in the sense where it's very hard to sort of manipulate the code. You send an NFT, it's not a smart contract. And if you click on it, send it to another wallet, there might be an exploit there. There might be some sort of inflationary bug with the system. You see that time and time again where people will try to create bridges to go from, say, Bitcoin to Ethereum or whatever it is. Someone will find out there's some sort of bug in the system and say, well, I'm able to print more of these tokens and extract value and, destroy the trust in the system. And you see that time and time over again. I mean, look at Bitcoin, which has been around since 2009, almost like 15 years now. It's very strange. I mean, there's never been an attack on the system. I mean, there's been plenty of attacks, but I shouldn't say the actual code itself, it's never been exploited. It's usually because people don't understand, how to secure their wallet or secure their private keys. But in a sense, there isn't an inflation bug. No one is like printing, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. There's no one's able to change the code and say, it's 22 million overnight, things like that. So yeah, I mean, for me, I fell in love with Bitcoin because it's just a finite number that's not going to be out there in the world. I think through the eyes of delayed gratification, holding on to Bitcoin with the very long time horizon, I think Bitcoin will be worth something in the future. a lot more than one is today for sure. But yeah, it's such a fascinating thing for me. When I found out about Bitcoin, I want to say maybe in 2010, I didn't really understand it at all. I mean, I was in college at that time. And then I go straight to grad school, pharmacy school. I'm starting to pick this up a little bit more. I'm like, oh, this is actually very interesting. There's a whole economy behind this. But I think, right around 2018, 2019, that's when I really started diving deep into the white paper and started understanding like, this is actually the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. It reminds me actually of the time when the internet came out and I was being exposed to it when I was a child. I started meaning that I didn't really want to practice healthcare anymore. Right around 2020, I wanted to go full time into Bitcoin. But I just didn't really know how to sort of apply that to healthcare until much later.
Like, with what you've created, have you got any kind of attacks? Because like I'm hoping that you'll expand that a massive level, because people will go, hey, because there's online buying as well, because before you couldn't do that, which you can. So I think once the information gets out, I mean, for me, if I was living in the States and I was paying X here and I was paying X to you, but I'm getting a kickback later, it's like you're giving me back, whether I get the stocks or the thing. I mean, it's a no-brainer, so it'll be a no-brainer for most people. But it's like, eventually you're taking money out of the hands of the guys that think they deserve it. Have you got any kickback yet, or are you prepared for people that'll kind of go, hey, I don't like what's going on here?
Mentally, I do think about that. I mean, if this business model is very successful and people want to have rebates back in their pocket, and you start to see publicly traded companies who run, these rebate programs and start to see, well, my revenue is being decreased because this competitor out there who's getting these rebates back to individuals. Ooh, that is kind of dicey, right? You start to think about a lot of these insurance companies, these PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, all these middlemen, they're publicly traded companies. Well, these publicly traded companies, politicians, senators, congressmen, and it becomes kind of scary, right? Because now you're fighting against the whole entire system. And I do think about that. If it got to that point, man, that is quite scary to think about that. I probably guess I'd be a target. But yeah, I mean, again, I think the most important part is to just educate people on what Bitcoin is, why they should consider learning about it, and either buying some or indirectly just receiving it through us. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I do think about this quite often. I mean, our mission at the end of the day is, one, can we make drugs more affordable? But two is it possible there's a mechanism where drugs can actually be free for people, whether it's they're receiving some sort of growth asset, Bitcoin, or it's stocks, your favorite company, or maybe it's the S&P 500. Maybe that medication will pay for itself in the future, maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, or whatever that is. I don't think I've ever seen a healthcare program out there or some sort of business out there that sort of pairs that, two ideas together. So that's kind of like the vision with the North Star we have at the end of the day for us.
I'd like to see, I mean, with the blockchain, obviously, because it's traceable, and then the kind of connection with AI as well, but not created by people that are owning BlackRock, Vanguard, all these different things, but like decent people, because there's so much natural remedies as well, and it's all quashed or whatever, or else they buy something and they park it if there's somebody creates something and it's never used. So like, if you can have something and you type in whatever ailment you've got and you get all the details. But the other one then is like, especially when they were thrown out, I call it the poison dart so that I don't get removed anymore, but like the VIRS report apparently is like 1% of what's reported actually gets out there. And I mean, if everybody who's actually buying something is able to add this onto the blockchain technology very fast, you would actually see side effects in real time as they are, instead of kind of determining by, like, because a doctor is trying to protect who's feeding him, and he's protecting Big Pharma and not the person that's just got a serious side effect, and that's going on big time. So like, if the individual had the right to actually do that, and people then are kind of going same, fast enough, if you're going to buy, if a doctor is recommending a certain drug, you can just go in then and check, and you're actually getting real data of this is the side effects. And I would love to see that that's the way the medical industry goes, because that way then all of the healthy natural things would help people. And as you're saying, would reduce the cost. And eventually, I mean, like, it's coming down to the foods. I mean, people are conscious now of the processed foods. And in the States, for some reason, you're allowed 1 billion times extra ingredients than the rest of the world. Like, but, and you've got a very, a lot higher rates of all these diseases. But, through education and just seeing what the statistics for that. So could you actually see that happening? Do you think that's possible? Or am I just in my little cloud here?
Yeah, no, that's definitely possible in the future. I do get asked that question a lot. What would healthcare look like on the blockchain? One of the concerns I would have, maybe as a consumer, I do think about this quite often, is that if all this information is sort of public, say your healthcare records, right, and maybe you're able to privatize some of this data, there could be essentially an exploit in the future. I mean, you're running smart contracts, and smart contracts, it's an if, or, and statements, essentially written in code. And if someone's able to exploit that, it does become a little bit scary. So the data that you put out there on the blockchain, if we're talking going beyond financial transactions and saying, we're putting actual electronic health records, well, how much records or how much data can we put out there that people are comfortable with? If we're talking about side effects, maybe that might be okay, but what if it's something a little bit more personal? What if it's your personal diagnosis of having cancer? Maybe something else, maybe it's depression. You don't want people to know that you've been on antidepressants. I don't know if we're there yet. I mean, maybe in 10 years or so, but I wouldn't say like, in the immediate future, the first, 1 to 3 years, I'd be very skeptical about that. There's still a lot of kinks to be worked out in terms of having, healthcare records on the blockchain. But it is something I do think of where it could be completely possible, but there's a lot of bugs and kinks to work out first. And, it is a concern I would have, especially as a healthcare provider. I wouldn't want these records to all of a sudden be leaked. And I have to educate a lot of my patients if their records are on a blockchain. Well, how do you secure that? Again, if you lose your private key or your social security number in that sense, it becomes kind of scary. It's very damaging. So there's just a lot of things to think about through if there was a blockchain and that's integrated into the health record. Again, that'd probably be my biggest concern. I did want to give a really quick shout out to Folding at Home. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's like an open source software where universities will try to ask an entire network of people to lease out their GPU or their CPU, their hash power, to try to mimic drug molecules and how they bind to receptors in the body. So it's actually really cool, fascinating open source software program where you can actually see in real time as you lease out your graphics card, you can see how these molecules will interact with all these different receptors in the body. But that allows these universities to collect data on possibly, what drugs or novel drugs that could be developed in the future. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there in case you've never heard about it. It's quite fascinating open source program.
No, listen, everything's fascinating, and I love what you're doing. And finally, the name where did the name come from? NiHowdy.
So yeah, I mean, when we started this company, I did not want to name it something really boring. I see a lot of healthcare companies that say something care, some drugs, something pharmaceuticals. I felt like that was a boring thing. And a lot of my pharmacy classmates, there's an inside joke where a lot of people would say NiHowdy to me all the time. And, that just sort of stuck with me throughout graduate school. I said, I think this would be a wonderful name for the company. It was sort of an inside joke amongst a group of pharmacy students. And I just said, I'm going to just pick that as a name. But again, NiHowdy is a salutation. It's like, howdy is like, hello, how are you? And then if you're in Mandarin Chinese, it's also like ni hao is like, hello, how are you as well. So I thought just combining those two words was like, oh, that would be great. And it's a fun story, at least to tell people when they ask, how did you come up with this name, NiHowdy? I just wanted there to be a story behind something. Didn't want it to sound super serious, like something care, something pharmaceuticals. It just sounds boring to me. If I was going to do a startup for the next 5-10 years of my life, well, might as well pick a name up, gonna have a good time, say over and over.
With other pharmacists then, is your system set up in a way that they can all tie into this and get their own kind of clients and work on the system, or is it just specific to you doing it? Are you trying to grow where you're getting other pharmacists involved in this?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question. A lot of our pharmacy colleagues will actually recommend this product to their patients just because it's the only thing out there that gives rebates back to the individual. But in the sense of who can collect these rebates, again, it's only meant for, the patients. We don't allow prescribers, pharmacists, or even doctors to collect these rebates. Part of that ethos as well, the people who are paying for healthcare should be the ones receiving this. It shouldn't go back to the physician. It should not go back to the pharmacist. It should not go to the essentially the providers. And we make it very clear in our terms and conditions. If you're a healthcare provider, you can't be self-referring all these claims to yourself. It's supposed to go back to the patients themselves. Again, our patients will pay out of pocket for some of these medications, and we believe these rebates should go back to those individuals. So we do have that outlined in our terms and conditions. That's very clear. But yeah, there's just a lot of doctors and pharmacists that do talk about our product with their patients. They always tell us, this is the only product that's out there that actually will give money back to individuals. And it comes in the form of either Bitcoin and student stock rewards, like the idea that here's something that can cover the cost of your prescription and, potentially other refills down the line in the future. It's a great way of building wealth, I guess, for a lot of people. Getting that introduction to stocks or Bitcoin. One thing that always stuck with me, actually, I just kind of thought about this, is that, during the great financial crisis, almost in 2008, 2009, that time, there was a study that was done to sort of determine the percent of unemployment correlated to the risk of suicide. And I think what they ended up finding out was for every % increase of unemployment, at least here in America, was correlated with, I think, like 15 to 20,000 additional deaths due to suicide. And you start to think about that. That's like, well, that really sucks, right? A lot of it is due to inequality of wealth. People who just lose their jobs. It's unfortunate. But just a lot of people, they don't own some sort of growth asset like stocks or even Bitcoin itself. But the idea is, can we give and create wealth in other ways for everyday people, especially those that pick up medications? Then certainly I think this is a great product to do so.
No, listen, I love what you're doing. It's great to see that this actually exists, and I commend you for creating it. So I wish you super success, and you might let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again, Roy, for having me on the podcast. But our website's NiHowdy.com, NiHowdy.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn. We're pretty heavy there. Instagram, that's NiHowdyRx. But yeah, that's pretty much where we're kind of around right now.
Make sure I'll put the links both on the audio and the video. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks, Roy.
So that's all for the Crypto Podcast, and also the Awakening Podcast. You'll find our episodes on awakeningpodcast.org, thecryptopodcast.org. Sure to consider thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends. And let us know what you thought about what we discussed. We'd love to read your comments. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you'll find my 6 podcasts on bio.link/podcaster. And also, if you'd like to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, you'll find the information on that or on the QR code that's there. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends because it really helps. Until next week, take care.